The world has changed. Standing alone to preserve the peace is a team of outcast heroes whose lives and purpose are defined by a simple and fundamental truth. Whatever our genes, we are all ultimately human. And if there is to be a future, we must all learn to live together. Extreme times require extreme X-Men. Today on the Comic Book Report, X-Treme X-Men Omnibus Volume 2. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another Marvel Omnibus review for all of you. We are back in the world of Chris Claremont's X-Men, in this case the X-Treme X-Men title that came out in the early 2000s. This is the Volume 2 that concludes his run on that book, along with a couple extras thrown right in. I'm really eager to talk about the book today, but before we do, I'd like to say a thank you and shout out to the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, The Comic Book Report, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's X-Men review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Chris Claremont and penciled primarily by Juan Bobbio and Igor Cordy, amongst some others. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2002. The volume itself collects Mekanix issues 1 through 6, X-Treme X-Men issues 25 through 46, X-Women issue 1, and material from X-Men Unlimited issue 39. And finally, this is an oversized hardcover edition with glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 816 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, now here's our first look at today's Omnibus collection from Marvel Comics, and I'll say right from the jump here that this is the direct market or DM cover for this release. I'll go ahead and throw up a quick thumbnail of the standard edition cover, just so you can take a look, compare, and maybe decide which cover is right for you. I think these are both excellent covers. I'm happy with the DM here, but both, like I said, are quite fantastic. As we begin to transition to the spine of this omnibus, I will say the only difference between the direct market cover and the standard is that front cover of the dust jacket, along with the image that's included on the bottom of the spine here. The spine, though, is a nice field of white with that red and yellow X-Treme X-Men logo, the Marvel Omnibus logo at the top, the creators, and that picture window we talked about, along with a 2 indicating Volume 2 of the 2-volume set for this run. On the back cover of our dust jacket, we have the thumbnailed covers of every issue that's included in this omnibus, along with a blurb about the book, what the omnibus collects, pricing information, a T+ rating, and that's pretty much it here on the back. I will say there is no parental advisory. This collection does have some instances of violence and maybe some risque character models for those sensitive to such things, but like I said, no parental advisory noted here. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this dust jacket in greater detail. This time I'll go ahead and show the interior flaps of the dust jacket, and then I'll go ahead and spread it all out just so we can see everything at a glance. And again, this is the direct market cover of the book. Other than that front cover of the dust jacket and that picture on the spine though, both editions should be completely identical. Now after I go ahead and show you this dust jacket, I will transition to show you the actual hardback book itself. We do have some nice art printed on a field of red here, and the art they included is basically just some of the characters from this run. We do have art on the front and back covers of the hardback book itself, not too much going on the spine under the dust jacket, but it is still really nice to see this. I think the volume 1 was similar if I'm not mistaken. You're definitely welcome to check out my review of that if you have yet to do so. And now that we're done with the exteriors here, I'd like to go ahead and transition to a quick look at the binding for this omnibus. This is the binding after reading it through completely one time. I will say my edition didn't have much of an eye here. There's perhaps a little bit of gutter loss, not too much spreading the pages needed though. I didn't really lose out too much to the gutter, but just something to know. I maybe would have liked to see a little bit more of an eye or the pictures lay flat a little bit more, but again, altogether, no huge complaints here. And as a bit of a bonus, I thought I'd go ahead and show this volume next to the volume 1 of X-Treme X-Men, just so you could take a look at what these books look like next to each other. You can see which covers I got for this run. I'm really impressed by what they did actually with the spines. I think everything lines up so perfectly, which seems like a given, but is not always the case, especially with these omnibus editions. So it's nice to have some uniformity here. I like that the logo's the same. We have 2 picture windows, same fonts, everything like that. Just looks really crisp and nice on the bookcase. Okay, now let's go ahead and jump into the collection itself. After some beautiful yellow end pages, we have the title page, publication information page, and then of course the creator breakdown page that shows you everything that's included inside this book, who worked on it, things like that. This is really what we have in lieu of a proper paged table of contents, but honestly I think it's pretty sufficient. And then after that we jump right into the issues. Quick note about how this is mapped. We actually start the omnibus with the 6 issues of the Mekanix Miniseries, then it jumps us into the remaining issues of that X-Treme X-Men run from Claremont, which is issues I believe 25 through 46, if I'm remembering what I said earlier, followed by the material from that X-Men Unlimited issue, and then finally rounding out with that X-Women issue, and then just including some of the extras we have at the back of the omnibus, which we'll see in a little bit. Now you might be wondering, what do I need to read before enjoying this book, this series? My recommendation, I think you really only need to check out the first volume of X-Treme X-Men to jump right into the action here. A couple other notable recommendations I have, however, though, that I think would even further round out your just enjoyment of this book, is reading at least the first bit of Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, and then maybe some of the older Chris Claremont X-Men if you're not familiar with it. But I think bare bones, what you need to enjoy this is really just the volume 1. You can really pick up right after that, but certainly the more X-Men knowledge you have, you'll just be more rewarded for reading it to enjoy what we have here. But I think most notably, parts of New X-Men as well would be helpful. And speaking of New X-Men, I should say that was running concurrently during the time this title was being written as well, back in the early 2000s. Like I said, the issues in here began in 2002 in the case of Mekanix, and I think 2003 once we get back to the proper X-Treme X-Men run we have included. Now to talk about some of the storylines here in this omnibus that I enjoyed, I just want to kind of cherry pick some of my favorites. Honestly, one of my favorites was this first miniseries, Mekanix. This is written by Chris Claremont and predominantly features the character of Kitty Pryde. Now this is one of Claremont's favorite characters, I'm pretty sure. He created Kitty Pryde and he just utilized her so much throughout the years, and honestly she's a fantastic character and she's used again very, very well here. This is a very fun little miniseries. Now this miniseries does take place in the wake of what happens to Genosha over in the new X-Men run. I'll try to tiptoe around details about that in case you're still waiting to read New X-Men by Grant Morrison. Suffice it to say, something tragic does occur that really does increase tensions between humans and mutants, and Kitty Pryde is dealing with a lot of fallout from the events that happen in Genosha on a very personal level. At any rate, she finds herself at college, and she's in also a mandated therapy. She's also trying to, finish her degree. She's working at a bar on the side, and she's just trying to find herself. She's distanced herself from the X-Men, the X-Teams, and just wants to kind of have her version of a normal life, or at least as close as she can approximate it. And that's where we find her in this series, Mekanix. We find some of her other peers and colleagues, or students rather, joining this kind of human supremacy group called Purity that really tries to go out against mutants and all the things like that, trying to out them, trying to discriminate against them. And Kitty Pryde is kind of caught in the middle of all of this intense tension, honestly. And Kitty Pryde is just dealing with so much just feelings of racism, bigotry, hostility, and she's starting to crack a little bit. And this is where the therapy sessions come in. There's these implications that she's been to war and she can't even share some of her most internal struggles. Certainly not with the therapist, or at least that's what she thinks at the outset of this miniseries. Along the way, across the 6 issues, we have her ultimately outing herself to many of her peers. She tries to save the day after a lab experiment goes wrong at the hands of this kind of human supremacy group, Purity, and we have her, again, kind of finding her way. In this series as well, we have her teaming up with an old New Mutants colleague. That was a really fun one, honestly. We have a couple new characters introduced as well, and this whole miniseries basically culminates with Kitty Pryde stepping more into who she is, having some breakthrough on a personal level, a mental level in therapy, and just with her main day-to-day kind of relationships. We also have her fighting these kind of newly upgraded kind of Sentinel-like machines as well. And overall, like I said, just a fantastic miniseries and a great way to kick off this omnibus. And for my money, this is actually one of the strongest portions of this book, at least in my mind. Now, after the Mekanix Miniseries, we do jump right back into the X-Treme X-Men run where Volume 1 left off, and this is a really fun time for this team. We have a little bit of roster changing happening here. We do have Cannonball joining the team, again, a prevalent member of the New Mutants. So we have a mission at the beginning here with Cannonball and Wolverine and Sage and a few others. Basically, we have Lady Deathstrike teaming up with the villain from God Loves, Man Kills, to basically frame the X-Men and do all sorts of other horrible things against mutants. X-Men are trying to investigate and clear their names and not get trapped into what's happening here. The conspiracy grows much larger, and again, this kind of serves actually as a sequel to God Loves, Man Kills. I don't think it has that same level of prestige, but for those that liked that little story arc, this is certainly a fun, just little addendum or something to check out. I personally love that original story. I don't know that you have to read it to enjoy what we have here in X-Treme X-Men, but it's certainly fun and novel. As I mentioned in these early stories, we still do have Wolverine on this team, but he does begin to transition out of this book. But we do also have some new members coming in. Like I said, we have Cannonball, who showed up at the end of the last book. We have appearances by Magma and Sunspot, and while they never maybe join proper with the X-Treme X-Men asterisk, they are still pretty prevalent in this book. We also have Gambit and Rogue, who were definitely in the first volume to a degree. They were depowered at the end of the last volume, so we have them in this book without their powers. Another novel thing in this book was they splintered the X-Team a bit. We have portions where Sage and Bishop and maybe Cannonball are over here, while Storm and Gambit are somewhere else, and Rogue is just kind of living her life as an effective human, doing her own thing. And so we have all of these kind of divergent plot lines throughout all these different areas with factions of X-Treme X-Men. In fact, it's kind of rare that we get everyone in the same story arc. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, as at this point the roster is getting a bit large, and the way they splintered this group, you get to see a lot of different dynamics at play, and you also get some issues that really focus in on specific characters, or sometimes two characters. Like, there's a couple really great issues that follow Storm, and you get to see some of her interior life. We get to see really cool development with characters like Rogue as she kind of tries to process her own situation going on. We have Kitty Pryde kind of joining X-Treme X-Men here and there. I really love that we got some of the New Mutants, like I said, like Cannonball and Magma, Sunspot. We have Karma show up in the Mekanix miniseries, if I didn't mention that. So we have some really fun appearances there if you liked Chris Claremont's New Mutants. A lot of great throwbacks and crossovers here. But yeah, after that first little mini-series, we have a couple other pretty intense stories. Like, we have this young girl, probably a teenager, who's in a car with her family, her younger brother, and her parents, when these mutants just come by trying to prank and terrorize them on the road. The dad takes the car careening off the cliff, and it ends up killing her entire family and maiming her for life. She gets twisted by this event and ultimately becomes sort of a terrorist who tries to destroy a bunch of mutants and humans alike in this populated bar. We have Cannonball and Rogue essentially dismantle her and the situation and the bomb. Notably, this actually was at a Lila Cheney concert, so we have her showing up and teleporting Cannonball out of the way. Lila Cheney also shows up a couple times throughout the book, which is fun for, again, longer-term X-Men fans. She's kind of a teleporting guitarist who has to teleport like from one side of the galaxy to another every time she teleports, or something like that. And her name honestly gets me confused sometimes with Layla Miller, the character from House of M and X Factor and things like that. But at any rate, that was a really fun story arc as well, and the characters from that story appear throughout the book. A couple other notable stories. There's a section toward the back of the omnibus where we have Storm going to Tokyo, trying to basically get in good with kind of the United Nations, or sort of the reigning governing bodies of the world. So she takes on this sort of assignment as a kind of a you're welcome, thank you, kind of earning esteem with this group. And she basically goes to Tokyo to try to unravel this sort of fight club, basically. And it has her teaming up with Yukio, who is arguably not the best influence on Storm, but we basically have Storm getting under the sway of this arena and becoming sort of a gladiator. This is a really wild story that has a lot of fun cameos for older X-Men fans like Callisto. We have Strong Guy from X Factor as well, and a couple other notable characters. Really, really fun stuff. I think Claremont does a fantastic job in this run, as he often does, with balancing a lot of subplots at the same time. He does tie up a lot of overarching plot threads as well, which is nice to see, but he also has so many throwback characters and moments for long legacy X-Men fans. Changing direction for a moment, I want to talk a little bit about the art we get in this collection, because Volume 1 was super heavy with the art of Salvador Larroca, who had a really unusual visual style where he kind of didn't have the hard inked outlines of a lot of the character models, which gave them kind of a soft airbrushed look. Well, in this case, we don't really have the art from Larroca present other than on a couple of covers, but we do have the art of Bobbio and Cordy, as I mentioned earlier, and I think they both were pretty loyal to the character models and designs we saw earlier in the run, while kind of going in their own direction. So we do have some change up on art, especially if you're coming in from the Volume 1, and that's something just to make a note of, especially if you're looking to buy for artists in mind. But yeah, we go all the way through the end of the X-Treme X-Men run here. Again, I'm bouncing around a little bit. There's, of course, other storylines and plot lines I wasn't even able to touch on here. A big one toward the back of the collection as well is sort of this psychic telepath character. They're not really sure who he or she is, but they're manipulating everything, mind-controlling characters behind the scenes, creating so much tension for mutants, and it takes all of the X-Treme X-Men coming together and converging to ultimately stop them. And that's really kind of the ultimate ending and storyline in this omnibus that rounds out the end of the X-Treme X-Men. And this was a really gratifying storyline as well, I thought. The reveal on who that telepathic character is, I might actually not spoil in this video, unless you maybe catch an eyeful of the artwork. But I thought it was a really fun, again, additional throwback, and just a really fun way to resolve that plot line. But yeah, there's a lot of great stories in here. I think that this whole era in general for Claremont is kind of underrated. I know he's so beloved for what he did in the 80s and 90s, but honestly, some of the work he did 2000s and beyond is still pretty noteworthy. So I'm happy Marvel released these omnibus editions, and I think if you want to read more Claremont, and you've heard mixed reviews about this, but you want to check it out, maybe you have room for it in your budget, honestly, you can do worse than the X-Treme X-Men. At the end, in issue 46 of X-Treme X-Men, after they've resolved everything, I think in the previous issue, we have them kind of reacting to the end of the new X-Men run by Grant Morrison, and it's basically the team reflecting on how the end of that run changed their world and kind of the landscape for mutants, and the team sort of disbands, at least in this current form. We have them presumably following up with some of the governing relationship that Storm was trying to deal or broker throughout most of this book. And again, the team kind of disbands, at least in this form. I really like that. I thought that was a cool way to tie into what's going on in the other X books and have kind of a goodbye issue for this team. After that, we have the material from the X-Men Unlimited issue, which is essentially a flashback for Storm and Yukio earlier in their relationship, just seeing kind of the dynamic dynamic between them, trying to thrill seek and almost die to feel alive. Again, all par for the course for their relationship from the classic Claremont era, and even what we have here with them with the gladiator trials and things like that. But yeah, that was a fun little addition. And then the last issue in this book, as I mentioned earlier, is the X-Women issue. As I mentioned earlier, there is some risque character models in this book, and that's definitely notable in this X-Women issue. It's basically a lot of the heavy hitter X-Men female characters kind of all together in this storyline to basically try to topple this island kind of crime syndicate or area. There's points where they lose their abilities and they all have to kind of work together. It is a kind of fun little issue. It feels sort of like a travelogue adventure, and honestly, if you enjoy a lot of the female characters in the X-Men, this can be a fun issue. It's definitely a notable inclusion in this work, and that's how they decided to round out the omnibus. And you will see bits of that toward the end of this video here in the next minute or two. But I'd like to spend the last little bit here as I'm flipping through the remainder of this omnibus just to chat on my overall thoughts on this series. I think while other great runs were happening in the X-Men franchise, most notably Grant Morrison's New X-Men, for example, I think this could really get overlooked, and I am happy that Marvel decided to go ahead and make these omnibus editions, because I think longer-term fans of Chris Claremont and everything he did with the legacy of X-Men really might have something to enjoy with X-Treme X-Men. I think for fans who enjoyed his work from the 70s through the 90s, might really get a kick at what he does here in the early 2000s, because honestly, he has so many of his same attributes of how he does storytelling for his X-Men. We have a lot of really great returning characters or characters that have been in his toolbox for so long. We have some awesome subplots that become main plots. Everything's so intertwined in a way that works well. The ensemble cast is always fascinating, truly dynamic, and the way he will break down certain scenes with only particular groups of those characters and then have the next scene set somewhere else with other different dynamics, I think is just masterfully done, and it's a great way to just feel like you can go more in depth with the whole roster of characters at different points throughout the run. Something else I really liked about this run is that Claremont did not necessarily rest on his laurels. We didn't return to a ton of returning villains. We did have a couple cameos of older villains, but honestly, he did so much new in this run. We have so many new villains, new team-ups, new subplots, new locations, and honestly, I like that. I like that Claremont was still taking chances here and not just giving us another Magneto story or not just giving us another rehash of something he did before. And honestly, for that reason, amongst others, I still think this is a pretty fun run to make your way through. At the back of the omnibus, as you've been seeing, we have the small collection of extras we get, which is mostly art, original art, inked pages, kind of outlines, character models, things like that. We don't really have much else in the way of extras for this collection, which honestly bummed me out a little bit. I would have loved to see like an essay or a couple more pieces of written work or some diversity with those extras, but largely just a couple different outlines, art, ink pages, things like that. Overall, I am happy we did get the extras. I think I was just hoping for a little bit more, especially at the end of the run here. And that is the X-Treme X-Men Omnibus Volume 2 by Chris Claremont. Now all that's left is to give this collection a grade. For a satisfactory conclusion to a pretty fun run from the early 2000s, the Comic Book Report is happy to give X-Treme X-Men Omnibus Volume 2 a B-. I still consider this an above average read, and with the inclusion of the Mekanix Miniseries, there is just a ton of great stories included. I smiled from ear to ear thinking about all the characters that Claremont had pop back into this run here, and while there might not be a handful of truly classic stories in this run, there's still some pretty solid ones. The art direction, both in Volume 1 and this Volume 2, are not personally to my taste, but certainly have their own draws. I would have loved to see a bit more in the way of extras at the back of the book, but I am grateful for what we did, especially by way of original art. Concluding X-Treme X-Men was definitely a goal of mine for this year, and I'm happy to say I've now done that after finishing this Volume 2. But let me know what you think of X-Treme X-Men by Chris Claremont in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks everyone. Bye.